Hi, everyone, and welcome to Geneva Centre presents The Shift, Improving Support for Autistic Females. My name is Frank Nicholson, and I'm a board-certified behaviour analyst here at Geneva Centre, and we're so pleased to have you here today. The Shift is an exciting, free virtual series launched to engage the neurodiverse community, families, educators, healthcare, and public service professionals to go and do a deep dive into diverse topics. Expanding their understanding and to challenge pre-existing beliefs. Apart from the shift, you can also expand your knowledge through Sonderly online training and our biennial symposium, which will be happening next year. So today we're going to be addressing the topic of improving support for autistic females. And we have a very exciting group of presenters who are going to be talking about a new research paper that they have that'll be coming out in the Lancet shortly. And part of that group we have presenting today is a parent, a self-advocate, and a researcher, and also a parent, who are going to be explaining the process that they went through in putting together the paper and highlight some of the main themes of the paper. Okay, so to start with, I want to introduce our first presenter, who is Dr. Alicia Halliday. Dr. Alicia Halliday is the Chief Science Officer at the Autism Science Foundation. Until 2014, she served as the Senior Director of Environmental and Clinical Sciences for Autism Speaks. She originally joined the National Alliance for Autism Research in 2005 before it merged with Autism Speaks, and was named Associate Director of Research of Environmental Sciences in 2007. So welcome, Dr. Alicia Halliday. Our next speaker is Dylan Miller. Dylan Miller is a neurodivergent 31-year-old woman. Her parents noted within 10 days of her birth that she didn't turn her head towards voices, but did respond to other sounds, but did not have eye contact with her parents or other people, but she would focus on objects. Dylan's parents were persistent in seeking a diagnosis of autism, and as a very young toddler, Dylan began intensive sessions of therapy, including applied behavior analysis, speech and language, and occupational therapy for 40 hours or more per week for several years. Dylan desires to be an advocate for people on the spectrum, especially women, and share her stories, her coping mechanisms, and past experiences, and to be a beacon for those who are on the spectrum. So welcome, Dylan.
Thank you.
All right, and our third speaker is Amy Kelly. Amy Kelly is the mother to Danny, Annie, and Ryan. Annie is diagnosed with moderate to severe autism, verbal apraxia, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and generalized anxiety disorder. Amy is the National Director of Family Engagement for Devereux Advanced Behavioral Health, one of the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit providers of behavioral health care, and serves as a family representative on several special needs boards in the community, locally, and nationally. In addition, she participates with other patients and families in efforts supported by the American Board of Pediatrics Foundation and the Autism Speaks Autism Care Network to address children with special needs and the importance of quality care. She also serves as the family liaison to the American Academy of Pediatrics section on Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics Executive Committee. Welcome, Amy. Before we start, I just want everyone to know that this presentation will be recorded, and you will get access to the recording in about a week's time. All right, so without further ado, I give you Dr. Alicia, Dylan, and Amy.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started and give you guys a little bit of background about why this is such a hot topic, why this is such an important topic, and why why females on the spectrum, or autistic females at birth, as we're now calling them, have been so underserved, and why there needs to be a focus on them. Can you guys see my screen? Oh, there we go. Perfect. So as Frank mentioned, a lot of this, the second part of the presentation will be about this new paper that we was recently published, and I will provide the shift, the link to the paper, so you can all read it. But before we did that, I wanted to give everyone a little bit of background, and to give you first some background. This is me. I have two 13-year-old twin girls. One is Sarah, and who's on the spectrum, and one is Jennifer. I call them delightful and difficult because Sarah, they're both 13. Jennifer's a little difficult, but Sarah's just delightful. So, and then here, she's the one, Sarah's the one that always goes on different adventures with me, while Jennifer likes to stay home and sleep or be on her iPhone. Sarah's the one that goes and does stuff with me. So as you may or may not know, there are 4 times as many boys diagnosed with autism as girls. So if you look at the prevalence rates for autism, even the reports that came out in 2008 all the way to 2014, there's still a consistent 4-to-1 ratio of the number of boys diagnosed versus girls. So what this means is, practically speaking, for girls who are in this yellow line, or this 1 in 4 out of the 2% of those who are diagnosed with autism, is that because there are fewer of them, scientists have been actually excluding them from research. This is a study that was published just last year that looked at the number of studies that excluded males from research, and there was only about 20%, and the number that excluded females from research, and so that was 50%, and this is autism research. And it wasn't so long ago that I was reading reports or papers, even as much as 5 years ago, that said that autism was a male condition, and therefore they made the decision to only include males with autism when they studied females. The problem with this is that then it kind of creates kind of a hamster wheel, as I call, of problems. So you have fewer females. Researchers are not studying them as often, or they're less included in research. And even if they are included in research, there are many more males represented in research study than females. And therefore, their needs, their support situation, the things that they need, the things that make them unique, how they present, all of these different things are just completely understood or misunderstood completely. And as you would suspect, and as you probably know, the girls' brains are different compared to boys. And I'm going to say girls and boys, even though we're talking about autistic females at birth and autistic males at birth, to recognize that there are, in both males and females, a high percentage of those who are gender fluid. But I recognize that, but just for the sake of the presentation, we're going to say girls and boys. So girls' brains are just different than boys' brains, period. And this is a graphic to represent the ways in which brain activity is, in fact, higher in boys than in girls, and then higher in girls than in boys. So if you can imagine this on the layer on top of developmental processes that have to do with autism, this can be, pretty profound. So why would we even ever in a million years expect that girls present with autism the same way that boys would if their brains just work differently? And in fact, boys' development, just normal development in boys, is different than girls. And this is in individuals without autism. So boys show, and this is kind of something that I pulled apart, boys show better gross motor skills, but girls show better fine motor skills. Girls show better and earlier language. They talk at earlier ages, and they have generally better verbal skills than boys. Boys show higher levels of aggression. Girls understand emotions and have better memorization. So how on earth would you expect that boys and girls, autism would look the same in both of them? Other developmental issues don't look the same. So then when you look at differences in boys versus girls in autism traits, there is a lot of variability in the data. And this depends, and I'll explain, on the level of cognitive ability, also the age. So this isn't a hard and fast thing. This is a summary slide that is probably an overgeneralization. But In autism, girls seem to have higher levels of social communication, higher levels of internalizing behaviors, which are things like anxiety and depression. Boys have higher levels of externalizing behaviors, which is things like aggression and self-injury, and higher levels of restrictive and repetitive behaviors, like hand flapping. But both boys and girls seem to be equal in terms of sensory dysfunction. And if something I have said seems like an overgeneralization to you, it is. I'm going to fully acknowledge that and make sure that you don't think that I am saying that every girl with autism shows this and every boy with autism shows that. So as I mentioned, it depends on age. So this is a study that looked at whether or not clinicians could actually recognize the differences in boys and girls at different ages. And you can see that in early childhood, they don't really see any difference between girls and boys, but by adolescence, they do. And then in terms of restrictive and repetitive behaviors, it's kind of all over the place. But clinicians tend to say that they actually don't even notice some of the overt signs of autism until, school age or adolescence. So it depends on age. And then it also depends on cognitive ability. If you look at boys and girls with a cognitive disability, their scores on social communication, restrictive and repetitive behaviors, and linguistic abilities are about equal. If you look at them without a cognitive disability, then they're kind of all over the place. But with a cognitive disability, they tend to be a little bit more similar. So as I said, these differences between boys and girls depend on age and cognitive ability. So a lot of people have asked, in fact, whether or not the diagnostic methods that are used in boys and girls, because they were mostly validated on boys, are they actually invalid in females? Should we just throw them away and start over in females? And there was a group that looked at this a couple years ago, 3 years ago to be exact, and looked at some of the standardized tools for autism, and found that in fact they're really not. Now, in the way that some of the things that are used to approach females versus males may need to be tweaked, but in fact the diagnostic tests themselves are not inappropriate. And that's been one particular criticism, was that maybe we're just diagnosing them wrong. We're diagnosing females wrong. And I'm not saying that we could do a better job of diagnosing females, because we could, but some of the standard measures are actually okay to use. And then going back, in fact, are there so many differences between males and females that they show just completely different phenotypes, and in fact, and then present just so differently? And in fact, this was a large study that looked at different factors that may affect the way that females or girls present compared to boys. And they did find that there were two things that differentiated. Here's the autistic females at birth, and here's the autistic males at birth when you look at different behavioral features. And there was two things that kind of differentiated them. And one was executive function, which was better in boys, believe it or not. And then also insistence on sameness, which was more kind of prominent in females with autism. So maybe these are two things that we should be focusing on. So this is another study published just last year that looked at the differences. I showed you the differences in typical versus atypical, boys versus girls who are typically developing. This is boys versus girls who have autism. And as you can see, different areas of the brain light up differently in males versus females autistic females at birth versus autistic males at birth. And so there's different regions that just light up differently. So again, there may just be since there's differences in the brain, why wouldn't we expect there to be differences in the way it presents? And in fact, here's one example of that an area of the brain called the nucleus accumbens, which is in fact associated with reward. It used to be only considered to be reward in terms of like external rewards, like drugs of abuse and things like gambling and other things. It's actually also involved in social rewards. This area is bigger in females compared to males. And so this may explain why females find certain things more appealing, or autistic females have things are maybe more appealing compared to autistic males. So one of the things I do want to point out is that just like in boys, we talk about the broad spectrum of boys and males with autism being very different across the spectrum. And in fact, we see the same in girls. So it's not so, one of the things that we show in common, males and females, is that it's a spectrum. You have differences across their cognitive abilities. You have differences across medical comorbidities, differences across language abilities, just in every respect that you can think of. And I used to put this like on a normal distribution, but in fact, it's really just a rainbow, right? It's just differences in the way that that things present are different across the spectrum in girls, just like they are in boys. So one of the things that we kind of thought about as the Autism Science Foundation, and then also as the broader autism community, was we wanted to come up, because of the fact that girls are actually not diagnosed as often, they're not included in research studies as often, there's really not specific clinical guidance or clinical suggestions to help females during different parts of their life, right? So, you know, girls have different parts, they have different brains, but yet they're not represented as much, and we don't know enough about them. So there was a group of researchers, clinicians, scientists, parents, and then also self-advocates, including Dylan, who got together on a regular basis over the course of a couple years and put together what we are calling clinical suggestions and research priorities, which we will discuss at the end after Amy and Dylan get to introduce themselves. And really, it was things that we feel should be highlighted or clinicians should know when, in fact, they see a female, an autistic female at birth in their clinic. The authors, as you can see, there were over a dozen authors. They represented everything from research to clinical sciences to neuroscientists. But we also, I wanted to highlight that most of us were, in fact, females. So I've highlighted the females in red on this slide. So we were mostly females. Some of us were also self-advocates or had an autism diagnosis ourselves. And that include Dylan, who is represented on this call. And others of us have a family member with an autism diagnosis. And I should have highlighted Marenike here. She is not only autistic herself, but has 2 children on the spectrum. So we included those who have family relationships, and then also, sorry, let me go back, and that also who had autism themselves or had a diagnosis. So with that little kind of introduction, I want to introduce Amy Kelly, who's already received an introduction, so I won't take time with that, but I'm going to turn it over to Amy to introduce herself and talk about her beautiful daughter, who I'll let her introduce.
You. Thanks, Alicia. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me today. So my daughter represents sort of the nonverbal or minimally verbal group. And it's an important group that also is neglected in boys and girls if they're minimally speaking or nonverbal. She was diagnosed at just before she was 2. Around 15 months, though, we started noticing some signs. However, now that I know so much about autism, looking back, I think I could probably identify some things in her as a baby as early as 8 months, maybe. But it was a difficult thing for me. For me, it was overwhelming. I had no idea even what autism was. I thought that it was only what Rain Man, if you remember that movie with Tom Cruise, I thought, and Dustin Hoffman, he plays the character. But so I really was clueless about it. So for Annie, she received her diagnosis and we were told to get ABA therapy and play therapy. And but, you know, really, Annie just didn't have a way to sit still. She couldn't communicate at all. She cried so much. You know, I was really the only person that could make her giggle. And it was just a sad thing for me to see. So you'll see in the picture with the yellow binder that we worked on teaching Annie PECS, which is Picture Exchange Communication System. And they use the little, for those of you that don't know, little icons that are Velcroed, and they use it as a communication strip. So she would pick things that she wants. The book is filled with things that are motivating to her. She's not going to ask for something that she doesn't want if she's learning to communicate. So if she wanted something, she would put the icon for I want, and then cookie, right? A picture of a cookie, and she would hand that to me. That was the start of her learning how to communicate, learning that she could be heard, and then and really controlling the behaviors and the frustration that she had. You'll see we advance, if you go to the right of that, the black and white picture, she then transferred basically to PECS on an iPad. They do have many different apps. She uses one called Proloquo Go, and it was one of the first ones. That's why we use it. But it did the same thing that the PECS book did, but and you could use a voice output button. So after she made her strip, she could hit the voice output button and ask for something. She's very creative. This is where I started seeing some really exciting things. And let me take a step back. I was told that if Annie didn't speak by the time she was 5, that she would never speak. And that was a devastating thing to hear from physicians. Now knowing what I know, and the doctors that I work with, I always say, please don't put any limits on our kids because they can do amazing things. So Annie, as she learned to use the PECS system and the computer, she started doing things like she picked on her strip, she put, I want the song, You Are My Sunshine, and then she had potato chips. And really what she wanted was sun chips. And so she started creating her own words on there. And at that point, we were trying to figure out how we could open it up to her so that she had more, ability to look at things. So we showed her the internet and YouTube, and she has done really amazing things with looking up things that she's interested in. It's a great way for me to learn more about her, is to look at her history. I think she would have been in the medical field. She looks at tooth extractions, and she loves like IVs and shots. She's fascinated with all of that. The most right picture on the top right corner is Annie. This was like the best day ever for me, but we were at her prom at her school. She went to an approved private school, so it's just kids with autism. And it was basically a 2-to-1 staff to student ratio. So very intensive, only about 55 students there. And it goes from ages 5 through 21. But we were at her prom, and she grabbed the microphone and tried to sing her ABCs. And I just cried. It was the most amazing moment, because it was almost like she needed that mic to be able to tell the world, okay, I'm ready to try and speak. She does have verbal apraxia, so it's hard to understand her. And, if you're around her a lot, you get used to that. But she has so much to say, and she's so patient to be able to try and get it out in different ways. So Annie just is, it made me understand that communication is really the main thing that we want from our kids, not necessarily speech, right? Like, I just needed to know what she wanted. I wanted to know how she felt. And if she couldn't speak, to tell me those things, and I wanted her to be able to communicate with me. And once I sort of, gave up the hope that she would speak and really just embraced her communication, I was able to, it was funny because then she started trying to speak. And so now I would say she has a blend. She's 21 now, which is hard to believe. She's such a young lady, but she, uses some speech and then some with her iPad. And sometimes she doesn't use that app. She will just open up a notes page and type out what she wants. I think she might have dyslexia, but at this point, it doesn't matter. We often see her flipping her letters, and she uses autocorrect quite a bit, which is also a smart thing. I do too. But, you know, for Annie, all these years, I immediately became her advocate and wanted to understand more about what it meant to have a daughter with autism. And I honestly, when Annie was diagnosed in 2004, it was the stats were 1 in 256 individuals had autism. Now it's like 1 in 33, I think. And, you know, I think that I was always looking for help with how could I understand Annie and her autism. And there was no research done. There really, just as Alicia covered, it was pretty frustrating to me. It was also frustrating to me because she has a cognitive disability and little language that she wasn't able to participate because research hadn't gotten to the point where they're able to figure out how to gather data from those individuals. So I've been very involved with advocacy and getting, you know, trying to advance the movement for females with autism in the way that I can for those who don't have a voice. I'm hoping that I can be their voice for them. I think I'll stop there and let Dylan talk.
Oh, thank you, Amy. So hi, I'm Dylan, and my story, the hook of it is Autism Unmasked, otherwise known as A Girl and Her Autism. So basically, I'm sort of unmasking my story and my own perspectives of being on the disorder myself. Oh, so starting with the detection and being a neurodivergent. I was diagnosed with high-functioning autism at 1 after my parents took me to a pediatric neurologist. And being a neurodivergent refers to an individual who has less typical behaviors or has certain variations in the human brain, which includes people with OCD, ADHD, and autism. So education and work, fast forward from the detection, I was homeschooled at a very young age, and then I attended preschool and kindergarten. And then after my family moved, I did more homeschooling when I was 9. I didn't go to like a grade school or middle school or high school because my mother, who was actually teaching me, thought that she homeschooled me solely on my autism and thought that like I would provide like better social functional skills, which was correct because I also didn't have to worry about being teased or bullied by other kids at the schools that would look at me in an unusual way. But then when I was 17, I got my GED at Holyoke Community College. And then I graduated with an associate's in hospitality management and a certificate in culinary arts at Holyoke Community College in 2012. And I went into cooking because it's something that I really love to do because it's my passion and it's a way that I sort of like express myself. And I did it like as a student's choice like activity where sometimes I'll bake something with my mom. And then I went to the New England Culinary Institute. And in 2014, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in culinary arts. And right now, I am currently a head cook at UMass in catering and with an all-male team. And I've had some stories of my life where I actually had cooking classes with either all males or where I was either the only female or one of the only couple of females in classrooms or other jobs that I had where a majority of it were was males. So the communication challenges that I've had, like since I was young, even up until today, was that I did have trouble making eye contact with people, referring to how when I was a baby and I did not make eye contact with my mom or dad, but I reacted to other sights and sounds around me. And specifically when I was little, I could barely speak, let alone be near others or physically close to people. Whether it was being hugged, kissed, or touched, I had a very strong reaction to that. And I had different ways of talking, expressing, and understanding simple matters, which led to frustrations, being overwhelmed, shutdowns, and sometimes meltdowns. And I, even up until right now, even up like from when I was younger to 31, I don't always say what I intend to say. And sometimes I struggle to find the right words during interactions with people. And I'm someone who often finds social interaction stressful because as an adult, I've been hung up on did I say the right thing or did I say the wrong thing? But as I got older, I progressively started to become more comfortable with talking to people and advocating for myself, especially like in my job as a cook, because, now I'm able to say, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, and responding to people and working on like being a leader and trying to delegate to others. And it's communication, like for me, like it's been a work in progress, and it still is, but I've been like building and building. So the idiosyncratic behaviors that I have, that involves not making full eye contact with people or pacing back and forth, sometimes like whether the room is a big one like my apartment or even in an elevator. I always feel like I always have to keep my body on the move. And also playing with inanimate objects. And that will involve like whether I hold a stuffed animal or whether I will like tear a piece of thread from my clothes, or even this thing that I did where I would take the in hooks of a plastic hanger and twist them until they came off. It kind of created like a comforting sensation for me, if you will. And also being kind of fidgety, because sometimes like my body will like move a little bit or twitch a little bit. And I would have repetitive speech and or preservation, sort of relating to OCD. This is specifically when I was younger. I would line up stuffed animals sort of like in a certain way, or I would build pyramids out of 3-ounce plastic or paper cups. And what was also very unique was I would have a photographic memory of past events. And sometimes they would be the most random things, whether it was like a strange dream that I had or what I did before my 5th birthday, or my brother on his birthday when he would come out of a restroom in a restaurant and I would remember what he was wearing during that time. So challenges with my temperament. I have misophonia, which is like a strong reaction to sounds. And they could be anything from loud noises or alarms that happen unexpectedly, or if somebody like would yell or raise their voice. Like if I was watching a movie and somebody was about to yell, I would just like bolt right out of there until like it ended, because I didn't react that well to that. Or if it was something as simple as, say, a timer on an oven beeping incessantly, or something like a loud ticking clock. So collecting information, sometimes I don't always have it in my head, and sometimes I would have to have it repeated so that I would understand it. Agitation and frustration was particularly challenging, because if something I do isn't good enough, I would tend to be really frustrated. And with agitation, sometimes big or small things can sort of set me off in a way, but it's easier not to feel that way when you're not so focused on what's making you feel that way. The biggest one that I've had probably since before I turned 20 was anticipatory anxiety. It started off with me growing as an adult and sort of being concerned on what I wanted to do in my life. And it was kind of like a starting point for me. And often I would really be anxious about matters that were either big or small. And some of the things that I had OCD about, like saying, hey, line up the stuffed animals or the pyramids, not what I have now, but I can get a pretty OCD about other things too. And, it's sort of a process of me trying to be a little bit more flexible if things don't always go right. So the coping methods that I've had, therapy was one of them. I had cognitive therapy, occupational therapy, and speech therapy. I still use therapy as an adult, and also using the right medications. I have been on a few different doses. And it was really trying to find the right mix on what would work for me, because it's creating a recipe and trying to put together the right ingredients together to make the recipe successful. And that's the same case with daily meds that I take. And listening to music is a unique one for me, because I would listen to music on my iPhone to distract me from crowded areas or noises that would cause oversensories. So basically, I would just fight noise with noise. And doing fun things with family and friends is a good way for me to take my mind off some other things that might cause me to be overstimulated. For example, if I were going to an arcade with my brother, ironically, arcades can be really loud places, but there are games and really fun things in there that I like to do with my brothers. So it does kind of distract me in a way, and it sort of makes me not mind the noises that much, especially because since I'm with somebody. Self-defense classes was a way that it overcame my discomfort of being touched, because I was a fan of wrestling and the WWE growing up. And I thought it was really cool on how they did these moves and how they did these submission holds. And I got involved in my adult life into kickboxing or akijutsu or other classes of self-defense. And it was also a way for me to forget about everything else that was sort of going on for a good 1 or 2 hours. And contributing. Since I was a child, I volunteered to participate at colleges and hospitals such as Boston University and Yale in studies for autism. Their groups of researchers have evaluated me, and that helped them upgrade their research in autism and other developmental disorders. And it was sort of like a starting point of building up my social interaction. So from the conclusion of an assigned female health at birth, the takeaway that I have for this is to bring awareness of critical topics like neurodiversity. Most of all, it is a way to make everyone feel included and that they are making an impact on what is necessary to be addressed, because it creates involvement, understanding, and acceptance. And this is where self-advocating comes into play, something that I strongly believe in, because an assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth have the right to self-advocate on their own perspectives and how they feel. In part of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, like a proposition that all men are created equal. Well, this applies to here, that this is a proposition that male and females are creative equal. And that most of all, they want to have a sense of belonging.
Thank you so much. And I also want to thank, before I talk about the what we discussed in the paper itself, both Dylan and Amy were such important contributors to the ideas and the things that were presented. I just want to thank them. And I'm going to go through now what some of the kind of the major recommendations were. It's certainly not comprehensive, because we all want there to be plenty of time for Q&A, but we have kind of highlighted a couple. And again, I will send a link to the paper to the people at the Shift, and they can make it available to you guys. So we got together, we had this group of people that were diverse in terms of our gender, although we were mostly females, our background in autism, whether they're clinicians or scientists, or parents or self-advocates, and then also our race and ethnicity and our religion. And we talked about what were some of the major hurdles for women, autistic females at birth, to receive the services that they needed. And we identified some particular problems. The first one is we need an expansion, or there needs to be an expansion of how autism is diagnosed or detected. And I'm not talking about the actual instruments. We actually thought that this more related to training of clinicians and potential tools that could be used within these standardized instruments, or whatever is used to diagnose autism. For example, one of us said, my daughter didn't line up balls or spin the wheels of toy trucks. So that's actually what they ask you, right? Is like, okay, do they fixate on objects like the wheels of a truck, or do they spin? And a lot of girls don't have that, right? Like they may have, they may do things with dolls or seashells or stickers or things like that, but wheels on the trucks, that wasn't relevant. Another one of us said, my daughter liked to stim with her hair, but the teachers and the people thought, oh, she's just twirling her hair. That's normal for a girl. In fact, what we recommended is that clinicians consider appropriate reference groups based on sex-related developmental trajectories, gendered context, and intellectual and language capabilities. What is it that girls like to normally do? And are they doing that to an excess, or do they focus on those things? So instead of saying, if it's a girl saying, oh, do they like to play with the wheels on a truck? Think about, do they like to line up their dolls, or do they like to, are they, do they focus more on certain parts of shells than others, or do they have specific interests in shells? And then also enhanced training for diagnostic assessment. So a lot of assessment, and this is just the way that of behavioral pediatricians are trained, is really they get minimal exposure to individuals with either autism or pediatric anxiety or these things, because they're spread so thin. Have them have multiple opportunities to both evaluate autistic males at birth and autistic females at birth. Another problem we noted was females have different body parts. And in fact, when females are not included in research and science, in fact, we know less about what goes on with those female body parts. For example, someone said, my daughter's unable to tell me what's going on with her body. And she says, fine, fine, fine. But it's a constant struggle to understand what's going on with things like menstruation, anxiety, and bullying. And then another one of the authors said, we learn to not ask for help until the pain is almost unbearable and we cannot cope. So actually, we decided that there should be special considerations given to gynecological and obstetric needs. And I know that not everyone spells gynecological this way. This is the way the Lancet spells it in the UK. So this is the way I kept it. And we need to understand autistic females at birth, their comfort zone, and to actively seek consent and empower self-advocacy, just like Dylan mentioned. A lot of females have said to me, this was not part of the paper. In fact, I'm just giving an anecdote. A lot of females have said to me that they actually, really do not like the whole situation about getting touched, about going to a gynecologist or getting things like breast exams. And so, and issues around things like menstruation and childbirth are almost too difficult to even talk about. So, not only removing that taboo, but providing doctors the environment where they can, or the training that they can provide that supportive environment. And then also ensure that the medical community has a continuity of care. A lot of times, parents of both females and males talk about this cliff that happens when their child leaves a pediatrician and then goes on to an internal medicine doctor. And this transition is difficult for everyone, but it's actually more difficult for those on the spectrum.
Alicia, I just will comment, Annie just fell off the cliff in June when she graduated at her school. The other part I think to pay attention to when it comes to female body parts is for those individuals that don't speak and that can't maybe understand what's happening to their body. Things doctors need to know, like do some pad training. I did 2 years of pad training with my daughter, meaning putting a pad in her underwear for a week every month for 2 years before she got her period. And I think it's something that we have to address more. And openly. I think parents often have trouble asking about these. They're not sure what to do. They might be embarrassed. And I think we need to make that also something that is of discussion.
Thank you. I feel like this is something that is bigger in the autism community, but I feel like also we see this in the typical community as well, these issues with female body parts. And then there are gendered employment options. And Dylan mentioned this, but this is a real problem. It's not just gendered employment options. It's gendered employment options across the spectrum. So just like Dylan mentioned, when my daughter was placed in a vocational program, they put her in programs with all boys and things she was not interested in, things like manual labor, copying, and office work. Dylan talked about, and I'll let her answer questions about her employment. She already talked about how, even in her situation, was in a position with all boys. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with working with males and females. But if you're working with all of people of the opposite sex, especially if you're a female, you need diversity. We all have women. We all have our female friends at work that we like to commiserate with and talk to. And so I think that that's really important. So we also need to not only create those employment options, and those include those that are competitive employment options and those that are non-competitive employment options. We need to create those options. And we also need to talk about research and resources and components for good care plans in general. So what does employment training look like, and how should females differently than males be prepared for employment, and what kind of employment options can we prepare for them? And last, but did I do 5? No, I did last but not least. I talk about this males are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of thing, just like I talked about with different brains, right? It's okay to say males and females, both males and females with autism, autistic females at birth and autistic males at birth. They're just different, and that's okay. that means they're going to have different interests. They're going to have different features. They're going to have different needs. That's okay. It's not something we should hide from. So someone mentioned I was in Friends with all the other girls in the class until about 6th grade. In 6th grade, they became interested in things like makeup and Taylor Swift, and they didn't care about things like Japanese anime. And I had nothing in common with them, and I began to feel even more awkward. This is my daughter exactly. So I can tell you her sister is a major Taylor Swift fan, and everyone assumes, are you taking both of your girls? Are you getting all these things? No, my other daughter likes to watch Japanese anime, and we watch YouTube videos about traveling internationally. And she's very interested in different worlds and different cultures. But some of these things, and this has been shown over and over again, that autistic boys and autistic girls, you know, just like typical boys and girls, have kind of the same general interests. And then when they get to like later elementary school, early middle school, they start to diverge a little bit. And this is when some of the differences become a little bit more apparent. And again, because I didn't understand or comply with social nuances, I was perceived as disrespectful. So one of the things is that we should really continue to make sure that autistic individuals, especially females, learn a positive sense of self. And I'm a person that's all about females across the spectrum, across the world, learning about positive senses of self and self-confidence. Also, this is a lifetime issue, just like it is for autistic males at birth. This is a lifetime issue for autistic females at birth. And we need timely, tailored, well-documented, and regularly updated accommodations across the educational journey and the lifespan. So interests at one particular time in life, they change. And so those things need to be accommodated for both autistic males at birth and autistic females at birth. So I wanted to give you my email address. If you can't get a copy of the paper, I will send it to you. I will send you a link that's good till about January, where you can get the full text of the paper. I'm also going to send it to the organizers, and they can attach that link to any materials that are distributed after the meeting. So I want to leave it. Dylan and Amy, do you have anything else to add that I didn't or missed? I tried to be brief, so I must have missed something.
I'm going to add another thing from my viewpoint and Annie's viewpoint, that you know, Annie has a great self-esteem, and she has learned very well to advocate for herself. In fact, you could probably call her bossy now. Mm-hmm. But she learned over the pandemic how to FaceTime my parents, you know, all by herself. So if I walk into that room, she holds out her arm and says, "No, mom, no, mom." And it's great. Yeah. And I have to respect that. She also has learned the phrase, "my choice." And so we are really trying to teach her for all of the things that she does have a choice in, you know, so that she understands she's empowered. She knows she's beautiful because her pop and Graham tell her all the time. And we do makeup when she goes out, and all the things that, you know, that typical or, you know, autistic females do, who may not be like my daughter with language impairment and cognitive impairment. But she finds pride in that. And that's so important to remember. I feel like, you know, Annie's group is often forgot about when we speak about some things. I know, Alicia, you don't forget about it, but I think it's so important that we all remember that they are, you know, feel the same things and want the same things. And it's just, how do we get them to, you know, communicate that? And then how do we also allow them to do it in a safe way that works for them?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that talk. That was really insightful and really great to hear from three very different perspectives. So thank you so much. We're going to open it up to questions. I collected a couple from earlier in the comments. And I think this would be a good question for each of you, because you each have a slightly different perspective, which is, what advice would you have for parents who maybe have a newly diagnosed female at birth child? Yeah, what advice would you give them given what you know now?
Well, I just want to say that my parents like detected what I had like at a very early age, and the earliest that you can find a detection, like the better that you can be prepared for your child, and what you can do to accommodate for them and to make their life like as pleasant as you can, and just do whatever you can like to make them as functional as you can.
My advice would be to be hopeful about the future, because I feel like when you get the diagnosis, and if they're cognitively impacted and they have interrupting behaviors and all of that, it can be frustrating and drain you, and it's hard as a parent to stay motivated. But I think there's so many gifts that come from this. I can't even explain to you. I mean, my life is so incredibly full because of Annie, and I have two sons that are also wonderful. They're neurotypical, but we all learned so much from her. And I never would have imagined we'd be where we are today. And I think that's the most exciting thing. And I feel like families have got to hold on to that and remember that, and their child will learn and grow and do some amazing things. They just have to be, patient, because I think we do them on their own timeline.
I'm going to say something that I would say to a parent of a girl or a boy is do your research. There's a lot of stuff out there that isn't necessarily helpful. There's a lot of stuff out there that is helpful. And so, just try to make sure when you go through, when you think about what your individual child needs, that you're not being swayed by things that you read on social media or things that pop up on the internet, that, you talk to a clinician and have work with the advice of a trusted clinician, so that what's going to work or what has the best chance of providing the best support.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that I'm also seeing a lot of comments about complimenting you, Dylan, and your bravery and sharing your perspective and your story. I think it's been really insightful to hear about your experience. And then someone also had a question for you. You spoke about how you have some of your idiosyncratic behaviors and how you found people respond to you, and who have been good cheerleaders for you in sort of navigating the world with that.
Well, my family has been like the biggest like cheerleaders for me, because like they've known me the longest, and anybody like who is new like to knowing me, like sometimes I find myself in a position to explain like why I act the way that I do, or why I sort of like say certain things. And like some people like open up to me and some don't. But the key is to not be afraid to like be yourself, because like whatever like condition or whatever you were born with, like you should be proud of who you are.
That's great. That's great. And maybe just a final question. We only have a couple minutes left, and I'd like to hear from each of you very briefly. Any advice to late diagnosed women who maybe are just coming to terms with this diagnosis?
So I will comment, I have not lived it, but I help many families who have gone through this. Also parents who find out that they're on the spectrum as they're getting their child diagnosed. I think looking at it as another thing to know about yourself is important. It doesn't have to define you necessarily. I think for many females that this is that have been masking their whole life and weren't understood, I think it's very refreshing for them to finally put the right name on it, instead of it being a misdiagnosis of anxiety or depression or something like that. we know that there's coexisting conditions, but to really name it is so important. And then to, like Alicia said, to do your research on how you can now move forward and use some tools to, improve your life and understand more what's going on with you. There's some great books out there. And I just think really embracing the diagnosis is important.
Dylan?
Like if you're diagnosed like at a time, the beauty like of being like a kid or an adult is that you never like there isn't a time limit of learning, and there isn't a time limit of learning about yourself, and that's sort of like where you kind of like need to dig deep about what your strengths and your challenges are. And and the most important part is to just be patient.
I echo what they both said. I'll be very quick. They both gave great answers, and there's really no reason to believe that early intervention, that it's the only time in your life you need supports. And so even if you're late diagnosed and you can find supports in any form, whether it's social groups, I know a couple in New York. I'm not as familiar with Canada, but whether it's a social group, whether it's some sort of employment option, whether it's really whatever it is, take advantage of it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming today. And yeah, just for everyone, there will be a recording of this presentation that'll be available in the next week. So you should be receiving an email with that. And we'll get the link to the Lancet paper and stuff to everyone as well. Thank you guys so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you for this opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.